Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. Today it's time to have a look at another devblog for Ixwa Strike, and this is for the SMS Kaiser. This is a new battleship which is coming to the ranks of Germany in the update. It's going to be rank 5, basically at the end of the tree, and it has a lot of firepower, a lot of armor, but not a ton of poor AA protection. So very similar to a lot of other vehicles which you'll find at this level, and it is another one of these First World War battleships. I wonder when there is going to be the transition from these First World War or pre-First World War machines into the next stage, obviously the mid-war area. I'm sure it'll come over this year, or maybe even next year, depending on how much of these machines are added. I'm very happy that the First World War is being represented in the game. I do personally think aviation would also be a part of the First World War, which would be lovely to see, but with the battleships, it's always nice to see it. Anyway, let's get into the history of this very historic machine. So during the 1900s, the German Imperial Navy placed orders for 5 new dreadnought battleships, and the idea was to replace the older warships of the Siegfried and also Odin classes. These 5 new ships would become the Kaiser-class battleships, which among other technological advancements, featured turbine propulsion systems, which was a new development for German warships at the time. The Kaiser, which was the lead ship of the class, was laid down in Kiel in December 1909, launched in March of 1911, and subsequently commissioned in August 1912. And after crew training and taking part in several fleet exercises, Kaiser, along with its sister ship, the König Albert, and also the cruiser Strasbourg, was sent on a long-distance cruise to German Southwest Africa and also South America to test the novel steam propulsion system for endurance and also reliability. The flotilla returned from their cruise to Kiel in June of 1914, but then, obviously, the First World War was just around the corner. So following the outbreak of the First World War, Kaiser took part in nearly every major naval operation during the conflict. This meant it was present in the Battle of Jutland in the mid-1916, where Kaiser sustained 2 direct hits, but didn't suffer any substantial damage. Also, Kaiser took part in Operation Albion in 1917, bombarding Russian coastal positions in the Baltic, and also crippling the destroyer Grom, which was followed by the sinking of Grom. With the German surrender in November of 1918, though, part of the High Seas Fleet, including the SMS Kaiser, was interned at the British naval base at Scapa Flow, and the commanding German officer, who was Rear Admiral Ludwig von Reuter at the time, believing that the fleet would be seized by the British, he ordered the scuttling of the entire fleet on the 21st of June 1919. The Kaiser, after being scuttled, was later raised in 1929, so 10 years later basically, and then broken up for scrap in the early 30s. So another machine which survived the First World War and took minor damage during the First World War, but unfortunately didn't have really a future after it, which is very sad. The SMS Kaiser comes in as the 4th one of these, let's call them large ships, when it comes to Germany. So battlecruisers and battleships. The vehicle itself, obviously from the First World War, is incredibly similar to a lot of the other vehicles that we've already seen in game. And since we have nations in naval which still don't have battle cruisers or battleships, it is very odd to me to see the decision made that one nation should get its 4th. The Kaiser comes in with a ton of armament, very similar to a bunch of other machines which is around the place. It has 10 305mm cannons at its primary. The way it's set up is 2 turrets on the back of it, 1 on the front, and then 2 in parallel on the sides. So being able to bring all guns to bear, you'll be able to do, but only in a full broadside, I believe. Actually, you might not be able to do, depending on how it interacts attacks with some of the physical models of the ship. It's probably going to be either you can bring 8 guns to bear on targets pretty easily, and then maybe 10 guns to bear if you're lucky, or it's just going to be 8 guns to bear. Now, 8 305mm is going to be incredibly strong, and also something we've already seen in the game on a lot of machines. The secondaries of this machine as well are 14 150mm guns. A lot of these are built into the sides of the ship in a very similar configuration to what we've seen in pretty much every other ship which is like this. And then also it has 12 88mm guns which are seen as tertiary guns instead of AAs. It also has some torpedo launchers in a submerged fashion, 5 of them, which should be pretty nice. I'm not sure how effective these torpedoes are when it comes to the actual game itself. Normally these battleships seem to just be impervious to, well, pretty much anything whenever I've watched gameplay of them, and I'm not sure the torpedoes are going to change that really at all. And then when we have a look at the armor of it, it's incredibly similar to some of the other machines that we've seen. It has a ranging thickness armored belt from 180 to 350, so pretty standard. It has over 1,000 sailors on it, giving it quite a lot of I suppose hit points. If you don't know, there's a mechanic in naval where if you run out of sailors, so if you normally get below around 5 or 2%, depending on how good your crew is, you will then sink because you will not have enough crew to be able to repair or put out fires or do anything like that. So the more sailors you have, the better it is because of the more survivability. Over 1,000 sailors is not the highest that we've seen, but it's still high and still good for this machine. And I'm sure the main guns will get access to AP, they'll get access to HE, they'll get access to all the bells and whistles, which make it an incredibly good machine. With 28,000 horsepower for it though, this isn't the fastest machine that we've seen. That is one of the only things that the cruisers that these guys face actually have an advantage over the battleships on. The SMS Kaiser could only go 43.3 kilometers an hour, so a little bit slower, as I said, than the cruiser counterparts. Whether that's enough to actually balance it out, well, it isn't. It's as simple as that. These battleships and also battle cruisers annihilate heavy cruisers, and unfortunately, I feel like that's going to go on as it is until we get enough battleships or battle cruisers in the game where they can have their own unique BR, and then the cruisers can fight themselves. Hopefully, the destroyers can fight themselves. If you've seen what's been happening recently, when it comes to destroyers and cruisers, a lot of the destroyers have been finding their own BRs away from cruisers, whereas before in the game that wasn't really the case, and that's because of so many cruisers being added. And hopefully that will be the same with battleships in time, but right now that isn't happening. Instead, what we have is the battleships being a very close BR to many of the heavy cruisers and the light cruisers, and, well, there's not a lot those machines can do against these battleships. One of the things that the Kaiser is lacking, though, which is the weakness of all of these machines, is it lacks AA. It hardly has any AA, and that means that it will be susceptible to air attacks, and it will be susceptible to good pilots. Now, whether that's, whether that is should be seen as a good thing or a bad thing, because technically you have to be able to get enough spawn points in order to get into a plane, or you have to, be able to do enough damage or, cap enough stuff without the battleships annihilating you to get into a plane. It's just one thing, that has to be done. But it's kind of like the CAS argument all over again. In order for, let's say, China to be able to defend itself from the air attacks, especially with some of the new mechanics being brought in, they're going to have to get into a plane, which is a lot harder to do than to spawn in an AA. But we'll have a look when it comes to these battleships, whether they'll actually, eventually they will get to the point where the battleships will have AA on them, but at least these ones don't. So they do have a weakness. Just the the criteria for the weakness means that you have to be able to get enough points to be able to get into it. In my opinion, this is another generic battleship. I don't know how else to put it. I find it incredibly boring as a vehicle, and I understand I'm not the target audience when it comes to these battleships. I'm sure a lot of people do like these things. The main thing I'm interested in is the physical model. I think it looks absolutely beautiful. I think whoever modeled it should be incredibly proud of themselves, but when it comes to the idea of balance, or when it comes to the idea of gameplay, it's incredibly boring. And also, it is frustrating, because even though I find it those ways, I look at the Italian tree, and I go, the least, the least this could be is an Italian battleship instead of another German one, since Italy still doesn't have access to a machine like this. Hopefully we see it soon. Hopefully we see a battleship or a battlecruiser for the Italians, so therefore they can be on the same level as everybody else. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. I'd just like to thank Teddy, John Ryman, Universe, Conte Baraka, Trigger Hippie, Eugens Terry, Ambrosius McClellan, Daniel Stanton, Martinez, B. Young, Hosest Kishore, Hans, Bareen, and Samuel Schlick for supporting the channel.